When it comes to the Final Fantasy VII compilation, you never know what someone might feel about it, most notably with Advent Children and Crisis Core, the latter one which I'll be talking about. Some seem to be indifferent about their inclusion, while others seem to dig it, and some just straight up don't like it. I'm leaning towards welcoming these installments into this beloved universe, but not without its fair share of issues at hand. But that's okay, because part of loving something is to acknowledge their flaws and even accepting it to some extent. It's cool if people don't like the game, it's just that I want to express why I, and so many others do, and who knows, if you're somebody who doesn't like this game, maybe you'll reconsider your stance on it after hearing me out. This video will contain spoilers for the original Final Fantasy VII and some light spoilers for Crisis Core, nothing major though, as I don't want to spoil the experience of trying to get people who have yet to experience it themselves to do so firsthand. So unfortunately, I may not be able to go too in depth with some things because it'll spoil the experience I'm trying to get you to go through. Sorry if you're someone who beat the game before and we're hoping for a deep dive retrospective analysis, because that's not what this is. It's more of a recommendation video, but who knows, that could happen sometime later in the future. Okay, moving on. Now, time for some context about my history with this series. Now for me personally, I got into this whole Final Fantasy VII insanity back in late December of 2023, which was when I played the original FF7 and beat it around the end of January of 2024. So it took me roughly a month to get through, followed up by Crisis Core in February of 2024, and then eventually watching Advent Children complete shortly afterwards, and then I beat Remake right after. The reason I'm saying all of this is so you can have an idea of where this whole perspective is coming from. Someone who's viewing these games through both the lens of the time they were from and today's standards. I had no expectations going into any of these entries. It's not like I have a special past or special bias with these games. It's not like I grew up with them or knew anybody who did. As long as you can have restraint at times, there's nothing wrong with necessarily having a bias. That's just being human, especially when the original Final Fantasy VII and Crisis Core are well-crafted games. The game was directed by Hajime Tabata, who also directed before Crisis Final Fantasy VII, and would then go on to direct Final Fantasy Type 0 and Final Fantasy 15. And the executive producer for Crisis Core was Yoshinori Kitase, who was one of the two directors for Final Fantasy VI alongside Hiroyuki Ito. He also directed Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII. With this lineup in mind, it's obvious that the minds behind Crisis Core know their stuff. This is further supported by a 2008 IG interview with Yoshinori Kitase by Dave McCarthy, where he says, quote, "Obviously, as part of a beloved series, part of a popular world, there's immense pressure to produce. It wasn't about paying tribute to the original, but to create a connection between the original and all the other compilation titles as well. It was in a unique position, as it takes place in the past, to connect all the titles." End quote. The point of sharing this is it displays that the minds behind this game knew how important it was to get it right with Crisis Core, and that they wanted to do their best. And to me, they accomplished that. Because they expressed how much they cared, I end up caring. It illustrates Crisis Core wasn't out to just try and benefit itself by being a good game and prequel, but also benefit and enrich the whole Final Fantasy VII compilation more in general, which obviously includes the original Final Fantasy VII. Crisis Core was one of the last few things to be released for the Final Fantasy VII compilation. It goes 1997, the original Final Fantasy VII release, 2005, the original cut of Advent Children, then Dirge to Cerberus in 2006, which, side note, the Japanese release didn't happen in 2008, which is kind of funny how Japan got a PS2 Final Fantasy VII game in 2008 when the PS3 was well established. And then finally, Crisis Core in 2007 for the PSP. The reason I said one of is because in 2009, that's when Advent Children Complete dropped. With this in mind, I feel like it's fair to say that the game had its fair share of expectations. When presented with the concept of a FF7 prequel, a lot of things can come to mind, like the early years of Shinra vs. Avalanche, or a more in-detail look of how the characters were like before the events of Final Fantasy VII. And what we got, I gotta say, I'm fairly satisfied with. It's still a personal, intimate story that's all about the characters while also serving and complementing the overall FF7 universe. Sure, a Final Fantasy VII prequel concept does leave a lot to be desired, but that's the thing I like, how, for the most part, this game, Crisis Core, it mostly focuses on a few things rather than spreading thin its attention with a crap ton of other concepts. Something giving you an experience that's satisfying enough, but leaves you wanting more. Some may argue that's a good thing. Instead of the next entry looking forward to the future like the movie and Dirge did, it takes us way back to the past in detail. Which begs the question, just how impactful and important could the inclusion of Crisis Core be? And did it succeed in enriching the Final Fantasy VII universe? Oh yeah, it did. At least for me. Not only did it prove that it's important, but overall prove that it's a solid game, one that's worth getting through, for the most part. Starting with, a valid concern I can see people having with the concept of Final Fantasy VII prequel is whether or not it will depend too much on running the contents of the original Final Fantasy VII, and being unable to stand on its own 2 feet for the most part, whether it be having similar intros or how Zack meets Aerith. I get why they want Crisis Core to not depend too much on the original Final Fantasy VII. Does it want to be its own thing with its own combat and chaos, or remind you that it's the FF7 prequel? Does it have to be on the train? Does it have to be on the flower bed? And I say, yeah, why not? For me, Crisis Core builds off the concepts presented by Final Fantasy VII pretty well. To illustrate this, let's look at the opening. Both scenes use the same setting, the Mako reactor and the train used to get there. From the start, the type of character Zack is displayed quickly. He's pumped up, ready to go, a little trigger happy, or blade happy in this case. The point is, he knows what he wants, and has one hell of a time. The use of the train scene really highlights this. Compare this to the OG FF7 bombing mission, where Cloud's basically a no-nonsense guy right from the get-go, barely has any time for names. Using the same situation and how each character reacts to it is a solid way to establish their differences, and this was proven even further after the simulation, in which we see how much of a people person Zack is.
I've recommended you for first.
Angeal! Oh, I love you, man! Angeal!
Don't make me regret this, Zack.
Sir!
Compared to Cloud, who really isn't, especially in the beginning of the original Final Fantasy VII, and this is further solidified with the remake iteration of Cloud. So yeah, there are examples of how Crisis Core does justify its use of the FF7 mythos, as well as the fact it can stand on its own 2 feet, but this is just the beginning. There is another example I'd like to use, but I'm saving that for later. So, the general synopsis I can give this game myself is that Shinra decided to play God and try to create super soldiers only for him to get messed up, causing one of them, Genesis, to suffer degradation and wants a cure, only for it to seem that there isn't one. So, if he's going down, he's taking everyone else with him, which involves Shinra, for all the messed up things they did, and anyone else who backed up in creating these monsters. Zack wants to stop them because he wants to be a true soldier, a true hero, and we'll get into what he thinks that means later on. Now with that out of the way, let's talk about the other guys you're going to be spending time with throughout this journey. You know, a key part of what makes Final Fantasy, the characters. Now that we already covered some of Zack's character, let's take a look at the others. Before we get to know Crisis Core, we must know each part independently, one part being each character. Don't worry, we'll come back to Zack. But for now, let's start off with Angeal. Honestly, I really like him. He's such a good contrast to Zack, but he still has his fair share of levity so that you can understand why you want to work with someone like Zack and put in a good word for him. It also conveys why Zack is good at what he does. You're probably wondering how a guy like Zack, who always seems to be having fun and being an unserious individual, made it so far. And then, the answer appears. Because of someone like Angeal, a mentor, a friend. Some even go as far as saying that he was a father figure for Zack. And honestly, I can kinda see it. Which, when viewed like this, it makes it even more understandable why Zack gets pretty upset when Angeal leaves everybody. I'm gonna try my best to tiptoe around some spoilers. And anything I do reveal, it happens pretty early in the game. And now that we're on the topic of Angeal, I feel like I should address the protect your honor as soldier line Zack is known for. Considering Angeal is the one who implemented those ideas into Zack in the first place, he made Zack really think about them. Some people criticize this line as Zack still believing in the good side of Shinra and Soldier, despite the fact that Shinra was never envisioned and built off actual honorable ideals, meaning that there is no good side to begin with, and that Zack is oblivious for believing in this good side, since that's what some people think is being implied when he says that quote, when in reality, when he says that line, I feel like he's trying to convey that for him, Soldier is a whole separate entity from Shinra, who helps Zack towards the end of the game, that Soldier is more than Shinra. When he thinks of Soldier, he's thinking of people like Angeal, Cloud, and Lazard, Zack's boss, people who can be considered honorable. Who's to say there aren't more people out there willing to defy Shinra and be what Soldier should be? Hell, there's another character like that. Freaking Kunzo, the tutorial guy. Towards the end, Zack's boss. If you played the game, you know what I mean. For all things considered, these important and meaningful people to Zack wouldn't have been in each other's life had it not been for Soldier. Soldier means something else for Zack compared to what we've seen before in the original Final Fantasy VII. Instead of being an extension of Shinra's Iron Thumb, to standing for doing the right thing, regardless of the price. The wiki claims something about how soldiers' valor and virtues eventually get lost down the road, becoming the muscle for Shinra we know and see in the original Final Fantasy VII, implying that those qualities were present in the first place. And if anyone should know about that, it should be Zack. At least that's how I believe he views it. Anyways, back to the others. Now, who's up next? Our antagonist. Or one of them. Genesis.
My friend, do you fly away now? To a world that abhors you and I?
Shut up!
All that awaits you
Shut up! I'm warning
is a
you!
somber morrow.
Somebody gets accused of murder in this scene. Genesis, this isn't the time for your slam poetry. Sometimes it be like that, but sometimes it do not have to be like that. Thank you. It took me 3 months to come up with that. Something loveless, something give the goddess, something if you be in the game you know his deal. Or not, if you're one of the many people who don't get his rambling. I don't blame you though. Now, a common criticism I hear about them is that he's just yapping. Now, if you already aren't interested in him, that might seem the case. Hell, Genesis' whole villain plan seems kind of aimless. And honestly, I would argue to an extent that might be the point. Genesis has no family, no home, no true alliance to anything. And on top of that, he sees himself as a monster made by Shenron's hand. No wonder why he feels like he's all over the place. He doesn't have much, and he's literally falling apart. Oh, and I guess he has a love list. Genesis is somebody whose mind is too boxed in and closed off. No doubt due to how Shinra is. He thinks that something like the title of being a hero is something that you earn from just physical strength alone, or that no matter what he does, he'll be destined to be a monster, not knowing that both of those things are decided by who you are and your actions rather than what you are. Now, I'd like to give my 2 cents in the whole Genesis rambling critique. Well, for starters, I feel like it's kinda obvious that what he's quoting in the moment is usually correlated to how he feels / thinks one way or the other in the moment. Because I highly doubt Shinra would teach him ways he should express his thoughts and feelings in a healthy manner. So, like a bunch of us, he is relegated to expressing himself through his special interest. For example, the quote he says when Angeal leaves is Genesis trying to express that why would Angeal continue to live in a world that won't welcome him because of the truth of his nature. Genesis is expressing his want to persuade Angeal to join him. If you play the game, you know what I'm talking about when I say Angeal's true nature. It's kind of a spoiler. Anyways, the point is, there is a little more to Genesis than a lot of people think. He's not some puppet master, otherworldly ambitious supervillain like Sephiroth or Jenova. Hell, you can argue he's still being manipulated to an extent after he turns against Shinra, but despite that, I just think he's kinda neat. For what he is, he works for this game, for the most part, and people should be a little more chill on him. And up next, one of the faces of the Jenova project, Sephiroth. Before he lost his mind, which on paper alone, hell of a concept. Now Sephiroth, at this point in the story, does seem like he cares, and that he's not like the heartless bastards in charge of Shinra. He wants to have fun. Actually, you know what? He does have fun. He even plays into Zack's humor at one point.
You and I will find them before they do. And
what?
fail to eliminate them.
For real?
Yes, for real.
Excellent! Probably.
Seeing Sephiroth act reasonable and normal ourselves makes the Nibelheim incident even more crazy. The point is that the perception everyone had of him before Nibelheim was actually real to an extent, which makes it sting all the more when it all goes wrong. Sephiroth, from what I can gather, seemed to have been okay with his current situation but always wanted more. But the fame and respect wasn't enough. I don't feel like I need to tell you this, but fame and love are very different things. It's nothing like genuine unconditional love, like say a mother would have, which is where Shinra went real bad with. They saw all that fame and thought that's enough. That superficial love is all he needs. The absolute bare minimum. I don't even think you could consider that the bare minimum. People see him as a legend, put him on a pedestal, never really knowing him, never seeing him as him, or worse, see him as just a weapon. And all of this snowballed into him losing his mind and throwing away his humanity. Sephiroth's backstory wasn't this detailed in the original Final Fantasy VII. Crisis Core took things the original game introduced and brought them to the next level. This is why I don't believe that this whole game is pointless and should be dismissed. We wouldn't have gone this kind of angle of sympathetic Sephiroth had it not been for Crisis Core. Now, something I find ironic enough that he doesn't consider himself human at all after finding Jenova, which is ironic because what led him there in the first place was a very human thing. Desire. Desire to find answers, an explanation, justification, to be truly wanted for who and what he was. Now, I'm not trying to say this makes Sephiroth more forgivable, but rather make more sense as a villain. For me, because of Crisis Core, he goes from a good villain to a great villain. Now, who's next? Well, it's only fitting that with Sephiroth, we transition to the characters we have seen before alongside Sephiroth, like Cloud. We never really got to know how Cloud was before the Nibelheim incident, because the only time we ever seen him before that when he was a child. Cloud seems like a sincere person just trying his best. We see the appeal of Cloud pre-soldier insanity through the lens of Zack. We get to understand even more now why Tifa always cared for Cloud and could care less if Cloud ended up being some hotshot soldier. We see how troubled Cloud is when it comes to his self-worth and self-image. It's kind of prevalent whenever Cloud is in a scene, with how he's unsure to confront Tifa, his hometown, his own mother about his failure of not being a soldier. Even before the Nibelheim mission, Cloud was an interesting fellow. He can keep up with Zack, which gets Zack's attention and then leads to their friendship, where, for once, someone like Zack sees Cloud for who Cloud is rather than what he is, and couldn't give any less of a damn of his ranking. Zack also believes that Cloud can't join Soldier and doesn't let Cloud give up on himself. Hell, he tries to make Cloud part of his backwater background. He uplifts Cloud and makes sure he's doing his best and lets him know that he's more than what he is. And I'm sure we all had a desire to have someone like that in our lives. Hell, maybe you do have someone, a BFF or a significant other, and this behavior also further reinforces why Aerith fell for someone like Zack, despite what Zack is, Soldier, which makes it even more tragic when he gets ripped away from those two. Now, considering this is a prequel, it makes sense why they keep characters like Aerith and Cloud's development and screen time minimal, since they don't want to make him grow too much because that's what the original game is all about. Anyways, Aerith, if it were to me and how I should use the screen time in a prequel for her and everyone else like Cloud and Tifa, I would probably consider illustrating how Aerith started to bloom into the hero we know and love today. Speaking of the original Final Fantasy VII cast, unfortunately there are no mentions of Barret and Red 13. But we do have Yuffie. It's unfortunate that Tifa wasn't able to get the same treatment as Cloud and Aerith. Nothing new really was added or that we haven't already seen in OG FF7. Although there is something in the Nibelheim section that does give Tifa a moment to shine, and I feel like you should go in blind to be pleasantly surprised like how I was. Oh, and there are also in-game emos, so I highly recommend checking all of them out. They have pretty neat character moments. The tutorial guy, Kunzo, has a pretty neat moment within these emos as well, towards the end of the game. You'll see what I mean once you play it yourself. So basically what I'm trying to say is, don't miss out. There are a few other characters I like that I haven't mentioned. Yet, like this game's version of Seng and Cissnei. I really like them both, but I don't want to share too much. So let's just say, spending time with the young Seng, it's dope. Crisis Core really gives Seng's character a bit more depth, and overall, witnessing that is a neat experience. As for Cissnei, she's pretty cool, and a fresh addition to the game's cast, considering a fair share of it is characters we've already seen before. Oh, and there's one more villain to mention, who even though is responsible for setting a lot of stuff in motion, feels like he plays second fiddle to other storylines, like with Genesis suffering from the degradation, and Zack interacting with the original Final Fantasy VII cast. The reason I'm spending so much time discussing how Crisis Core enriches the characters is because a big part of the Final Fantasy VII universe is the characters. If the characters get enriched, then so does the respective universe. So for the sake of time, let's wrap this section up and move on. Now with that out of the way, next is the whole thing that should tie this whole game together, the gameplay. Now, similar to the remake series gameplay, you don't have to wait for turns. You can just swing your sword and use your magic if you have enough MP. And this is where a few issues with the game's combats start to arise. You see, for reference, in the remake series, you have the ATB gauge you need to fill up before you do anything that isn't just your basic weapon attack. This is the thing, so you won't spam a move and miss out on properly engaging with the combat. In Crisis Core, there is no such thing. Have MP, you just spam the corresponding elemental weakness. Now, when I explain it like this, it might seem basic and bare bones. To be fair though, the enemies don't just sit there and take it. They actually move around and attack and defend, dodge, use attack that you have to block, use attacks that you have to dodge. There's no one strategy to beat them all. Some have a handful of health where you can't just power it through because they have more health than you do. The reason I'm comparing it to Remake is because they roughly have similar gameplay and are also part of the same sub-series. But it is understandable why some folks have the sentiment that a handful of combat encounters are repetitive. Not all, just some, especially not the bosses or late game encounters that kick your ass. You cycle through your sword and the 4 equipped materia you have with the L and R buttons. You use X to attack, square to dodge, triangle to block, and circle as a shortcut to immediately return to your sword instead of having to press L or R a few times to do so, which is pretty helpful when you're in the heat of battle. Oh, and there's also AP points. AP points are action points, which are needed to dodge and block. Yeah, you need AP points like how you need MP to do any magic at all. In this case, you need AP points to do actions like dodge or block, and every time you get hit while blocking, you lose a point, which means you'll have to be on an offensive playstyle more often than not. And you can recover AP using Soma, like how Ether recovers MP. Oh, and I do want to bring attention to a unique mechanic from Crisis Core. May I introduce the Materia Fusion System? The Materia Fusion System allows Zack to use 2 materia to form a new materia piece. Later in the game, you're able to include items in the fusion to give a new materia enhanced stat bonuses. Rare types of materia can only be attained through this mechanic, and looking at the wiki, these combinations sound cool as hell. Like poison and power attack materia can create Poison Blade. There's a combination for a stronger barrier materia and healing materia. These days can be handy. If you want to take the combat to the next level, you have to go out and look for it. The ingredients are there. It's up to you to cook whatever abomination you want to use to destroy your enemies. Although, a problem arises again. To be fair, the blame can be put on me for this issue, or any other player who has a familiar sentiment as me. I never really had an incentive to use it. The mechanic and concept of it isn't the problem, but rather the game didn't encourage me enough to invest in it. Because it's not like you're given much reason to get rid of the starter materia. Those materia are always needed. Maybe instead of having most of the enemies have the same 3 weaknesses, fire, ice, lightning, you maybe got some enemies with more unique weaknesses, like enemies that can only be weakened by static effects before the opening can normally damage, giving me a reason to give a crap about poison, which in turn can get me to take a look at my materia and figure out what the situation demands, leading me to trying out some materia fusion combo I haven't considered before. Like, some of the only few other unique materia I give a damn about outside of those 3 were healing and barrier. Oh, and HP and M up. I didn't give a good look to this mechanic until way later in the game. Again, it could very much be a me problem, because looking back at the list of combos, I feel like I missed out big time. So don't be like me. Actually, do more than the bare minimum. Don't let yourself be boxed in away from the possibilities of the materia fusion system. Who knows, maybe next time I start a new game, I'll invest more of my time with that mechanic. Now with the combat out of the way, you know what's next? You can't talk Crisis Core gameplay without talking about the DMW, which no, is not the DMV. The DMW stands for the Digital Mind Wave. Now, what's the in-universe angle of this? It's basically supposed to be Zack's inner thoughts and feelings, hence why his emotions can affect what the wheel does. The game even said it itself at times. Heightened emotions have affected the DMW. In the wiki, it says, quote, "The English version website for Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII explains that soldier members are taught to call upon their past experiences in battle to heighten their strength and improve their skills further, namely leveling up." End quote. This greatly conveys what Zack's deal is. How Zack's the kind of character that is not afraid to let his emotion take control when the situation calls for it. This is a compelling way of tying game mechanics with the game's narrative. Now, the gameplay angle of this, depending on what you get with the wheel, it decides what helpful things you get, such as not wasting any MP when using magic or having a barrier activate. The DMW also helps level up whatever equipped material you have in the moment, as well as Zack himself. Whenever you get 3 in a row of a certain character, you get a limit break. And this could either be something that can deal damage, heal you, or a status effect. The leveling up happens the same way the limit breaks do. Oh, and whenever you get 3 in a row, it plays a cutscene of an off-screen memory Zack had with that respective character, which you can skip, don't worry. To get those limit breaks, the game stops everything and initializes modulating phase. The problem is that it stops everything dead in your tracks for like 10 to 20 seconds, I think, and then it goes back to the game. I have heard the sentiment that it can feel like the game is playing itself at times, with how often modulation phase happens, since it's not ready for a limit break that does a lot of the work to pop up. Not to mention, when you do get 3 in a row, your HP, MP, and AP go beyond the max amount you would have normally, give you one hell of an advantage. As far as I know, you can't get rid of it. As for me personally, I agree, to an extent. I don't think we should brush out the whole concept entirely. I don't see that it's a problem. It doesn't mean that it isn't one for everyone else. But I'm not gonna lie that whenever I would see the modulating phase, I might pretty much will clock out that fight knowing it was basically done. And then again, that happened with the basic enemy encounter, so maybe I didn't miss out on much with the modulating phase helping me out. But with bosses, it can be a different story. The modulating phase didn't really help me. Neither did it for a few other fights. So, I will be giving out a few pointers on how the DMW could have been more polished. Pointers I'm sure a lot of people will agree with, such as making it somewhat less prevalent and being able to skip straight to the results. Oh, and just having it be forwardly explained at the beginning of the game can be helpful too. And side note, I have yet to play the re-release version of this game, so I'm kinda clueless how things were handled there. I feel like some basic quality of life stuff like this can go a long way. And up next, alongside the main campaign, are the missions. And in context that this was a PSP game, meaning that there were people with PSPs on them on the go, they are very much welcome. These are basically bite-sized missions. You can just hop in and hop out. Now, anyone who's ever played Crisis Core knows that there's a lot of them here. The ones that I played myself are the ones we had to get from point A to point B and just defeat enemies along the way. The missions also have an in-universe explanation for why Zack is doing them, such as the Shinra missions being Zack helping out with Shinra Grunts training, or dealing with Genesis clones that are just lingering around. According to Wiki, there are 300 of them and can make up most of the game's playtime, which is crazy because the amount I did is a fraction of that. Now, an issue people have with these missions is that if you want to get the good stuff to help out for the end game, you gotta grind these, especially for the second to last boss. Although grinding does come with Final Fantasy in general and other similar games, so it is what it is, I guess. Listen, I know I said I wasn't going to give away much, but I feel like this is kinda necessary. Try to get the wall materia and costly punch as soon as you can. You can look it up in the wiki and choose your preferred method of getting the wall materia and costly punch. There's a few. Oh, and the auto locker can be a bit janky at times. Now, the next thing I'd like to mention that needs to be talked about when it comes to Crisis Core is the music, which might be tricky to talk about considering Square Enix copyright, but we'll see. Now, I'm no music professional or anything, but man, does this soundtrack make you really feel. This soundtrack has it all. Great original score, primarily by Takeharu Ishimoto, and Kazuhiko Toyama. Great remixes of Nobuo Uematsu music from the OG FF7. One hell of a licensed vocal song by Ayaka Lida used for the credits. If you know, you know. They also use songs from the Last Order of Final Fantasy VII OVA. Some standouts for me, I'm not gonna use remixes to give more attention to the original stuff, are Dreams and Honor, Under the Apple Tree, the game's battle theme Conflict, Howling Ambitions, The Planet Has Become My Guardian, and of course, The Price of Freedom. All these songs do a crazy job at conveying the mood of the respective scenes, elevating that thing to the next level. The game's use of primarily string instruments like guitar, electric, and acoustic is fantastic. The violins are crazy too. This soundtrack does not disappoint. Don't even get me started on the vocal song in the end. If you haven't played the game or listened to the soundtrack at all, I'm telling you, hold off listening to those songs by themselves until you come across them playing the game yourselves. Cause man, the first time they hit like crazy. Well then, so far, this game seems to have a vision put well together. Cool characters, dope gameplay, touchy music, compelling acting, and a beloved protagonist to help tie it all together. Oh right, I promise to talk about him. Let's talk about Zack's role within the narrative. Where to begin? Oh, first off, according to an interview from OneUp.com by James Milkey right before the US release of the game in 2008, the game's executive producer Yoshinori Kitase claims that one of the reasons why Zack was made the protagonist was because of his predetermined fate. Which is interesting because you think writing a protagonist that has a predetermined fate might be fairly limiting, which to an extent, yeah, but still, the fact that so much was able to be done with Zack is kinda cool and crazy. When it comes to prequels, especially with characters whose fate you already know is bad, whether it's turning evil like Lex Luthor from Smallville, or Anakin in Star Wars, or in Zack's case, dying. It can be hard to grab people's attention to invest in them knowing what their fate is going to end up being. So, What do? Make them care. Make them enjoyable, humanized, and likable. So that you forget for a moment what happened, and when you do remember, you feel a sense of dread wash over, making the audience not want their fate to happen. And Zack himself, he's one hell of a guy. Funny, confident, strong, compassionate, and sincere. He knows what he wants and kind of makes that his whole deal, which is why it's compelling when that desire gets questioned big time. Does the path of being a soldier lead to his dream of being a true hero? Well, first off, let's dissect what Zack's meaning of a hero truly is. Even though he never flat out says it, it seems to me that being a hero for Zack is protecting people by being strong, to defend and not to attack, and not necessarily just physical strength. Does he have the mental and emotional strain where he's forced to go through and still find it within him to try his best? This is one of the challenges Zack is confronted with. The plot isn't served of the characters, it pushes Zack to his limits and how he perseveres through it. And how does he do it? Who knows? Maybe you should see for yourself playing the game. One last big topic about this game I'd like to cover before I go is the theme of legacy within this game. Here's a quote I found within the wiki from the game's director, Hajime Tabata. I unfortunately couldn't find the original source for it. Quote, "The overall theme of the game is legacy. We wanted to show how one person lives her life, influences the following generation, and paves the way for a new age." End quote. When I first saw this quote, I looked back to my time spent with this game with that quote in mind, and honestly, I gotta say, yeah, this game embodies that statement. And Zack is the poster boy for that theme in this game, both literally and metaphorically. Literally with Cloud inheriting Zack's trait with the whole Genova cells, and metaphorically with the Buster Sword, along with influencing people like Aerith, pushing her to get out there a little more, encouraging her to start setting flowers and become the open and warm hero we know now. Zack was also pretty helpful for Cloud as well, but then Shinra butted in. Something else I would like to point out that the wiki has brought my attention to, the use of the word crisis. Quote, "Crisis shapes and uncovers one's true nature, revealing those able to uphold their honor and optimism. In contrast, the crisis reveals those who choose to give into despair." End quote. And yeah, it's right on the money. The quote is basically conveying that what we are isn't what makes up who we are, when in reality, for the most part, it's the choices. What we choose to do during those crises decides who we are. But how does this illustrate and benefit Zack's character? Well, for starters, Zack knows he's made it big time one way or the other. And what does he do with his power? This status, this influence? He uses it to help others, lift others up. Again, Zack never says straight out what being a hero for him means, but it's safe to assume that's the idea for him. Besides, being a kick-ass fighter. And what Zack does in moments of crisis compared to the others further reinforces this. When faced with the choice of giving up on his friend, he doesn't. Zack is the kind of character that turns to his humanity when in difficult times. He has a lot of perseverance, especially when it really matters. And of course, when faced with his demise, he didn't back down. Why? Because ultimately, another friend of Zack's needed him. Sometimes being a hero isn't being the best monster slayer. A hero can be someone doing something as simple as reassuring and being there for their loved ones, letting them know they'll be there for them, which can create an impact, which can change that person as a result, and that person can also spread good because of that change, even after the reason for that change in the first place is gone. The positive impact lives through the people that were affected for the better, and all remains is a cherished memory, creating a living legacy. Thanks for watching. Oh, and shout out to the people behind the Final Fantasy wiki. I'm sure you can tell, the wiki helped out with a few things. Okay, until then, take care.